The Promised Land, Lesson 2, to Egypt and back. Last week, or not last week, the last time, we talked about the beginnings of what started, because I'm using the Bible as our background because we're a church and we believe in the Bible. I'm using the Bible for background material and to take us through the land, starting with the Abrahamic covenant and right on through in Scripture. Now, all the maps and stuff I use are not necessarily from biblical sites, because I try to get the maps of just not the ones. I don't want to get propaganda from anybody. I want to get as close to what I can as I have these maps and different pictures and things. So I just wanted you to know that before we get started tonight. But tonight we're going to talk about to Egypt and back. And we're going to start in Genesis 50, verse 4. When the days of mourning were over for Jacob, in case you want to know, Joseph said to Pharaoh's household, "If I have found favor with you, please tell Pharaoh that my father made me take an oath, saying, I am about to die. You must bury me there in the tomb that I made for myself in the land of Canaan. Now let me go and bury my father, then I will return." So the Pharaoh said, "Go and bury your father in keeping with your oath." Okay, first, the question to get us some background: why was Jacob and his family in Egypt in the first place? There was a famine. How many of them came? How many came with Jacob? No. How many came with Jacob from Canaan to Egypt? Joseph came by himself because he was sold into slavery. Yep, there was I think the Bible said about 70 people or something like that came there. Okay? So their family was there because of the famine, and Joseph sent for them and brought them in so that way he could take care of the family and preserve the people of Israel, the people of the covenant, Abraham's seed, to preserve them and keep them safe. And now it says, why was it so important to Jacob to be buried in the land of Canaan? Why did it mean so much to him that he made his son take an oath that he'd take him all the way back from Egypt to Canaan to bury him? Why was that so important? Pardon me? Well, it's family land, but if it was part of the covenant with Abraham. He promised Abraham this land was more than just a piece of property. I have property. You all have property. If we, for some reason, had to move to California, forgive the thought, but if I had to move to California and we lived there for 50 years until I was 60 years old, and it came time for me to die, I don't know that I'd tell them to haul me all the way back here to bury me on this. The land, we see land as around this community, family land is important because it's family land, but it's not attached to a covenant that has been made with our family into perpetuity like it was here. So it was important for him to be buried there because this was the promised land. It was promised to Abraham. And you remember, last time we were together, read and pointed out where these boundaries roughly were that God set for this covenant. So the covenant with Abraham had to do with the land and to do with his offspring. It had to do with the coming Messiah. And so it was all tied together. So this land was it was more important than just a piece of dirt. And last week I showed you a picture of the tomb of the patriarchs, or the cave of the patriarch. This is I don't know if I showed you this picture, but this is the one with the steps. I don't think the one I showed last week had. Anyway, this is where they think is the tomb of the patriarchs, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and some of their wives were buried, was in this spot and matches it. Well, I thought that I would do some interior shots to kind of give you, so you can get a kind of a feel of it. And each one of these, I think this is where the tomb of Isaac is, supposedly. And the next one, you'll see these, and there's 4 in one room, and it's for different ones of the family. They say who it's supposed to be. They don't know for sure. Nobody can tell you for sure because there was nothing on the tomb written or any pictures of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and all of them. So this is where they think it is. But anyway, it's important enough that they built this shrine there The Arabs believe this Abraham's tomb as well, and the Christians pretty much so the Jews do, and so on. And this was the tomb. This is the entrance into the tomb of supposedly the tomb of Abraham. So you can see they have a pretty big shrine built there to commemorate that this is where that they were all buried, and they're all buried in this land. So now let's go down to the 24th verse, Genesis 50:24. Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will certainly come to your aid. Listen to what he said. He said, God will certainly, he was pretty confident, wasn't he? God will certainly come to your aid and bring you up from this land to the land he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Joseph made the sons of Israel take an oath. When God comes to your aid, you are to carry my bones up from here. Joseph died at the age of 110. They embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt. He said, when you leave from here, you take my bones. So it wasn't just Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph, he thought enough of this covenant relationship. He wanted his bones carried back and buried in the promised land. Now we'll go to Exodus 12:40. The time the Israelites lived in Egypt was how many years? 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on the same day, all the Lord's divisions went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night vigil in honor of the Lord because he would bring them out of the land of Egypt. This same night is in honor of the Lord, a night vigil for all the Israelites throughout their generation. It was 430 years. Okay, let's go down to the 13th chapter, and then we're going to land somewhere in just a second. Moses took the bones of Joseph. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear a solemn oath saying, God will certainly come to your aid. That's pretty good faith, isn't it? Do you have that kind of faith? Don't answer my question. I'm just thinking. He had that kind of faith. He said, when you go back, and I know you're going back, you take my bones. And so Moses did. Said, God will certainly come to your aid. Then you must take my bones with you from this place. What did the land of Abraham look like during the time of Israel, that Israel was in Egypt? Who was there? Who was living there? What did the land look like? Because they were gone for a while. And so who lived on this land? What did it look like, and who lived there? Now, to get us to that, how many years did Israel live in Egypt? What did we just read? 430 years. Okay, I'm going to read. We're going to back up in Exodus a little bit. A new king who had not known Joseph came to power in Egypt. Okay. This is 400 years later after Joseph. Okay. If we go back 400 years, we can say it was about the 1600s. Show of hands, how many of you know one of your ancestors that lived in the 1600s? 1700s? I know one in the 1700s, Asa Brown, because that was the first one that was listed in the Browns as coming to this area from Ireland. But 400 years ago, so when it says here a king that didn't know Joseph, I guess he didn't know Joseph. He didn't know much of anybody who's living back in 400 years before. So when you look at the way Pharaoh treated the children of Israel, we're not going to get into that tonight, but the way that he treated the children of Israel and what he did with them, you think how harsh and how terrible he was and so on, with Joseph having rescued them. He didn't know who in the world Joseph was. He might know from the tale that had been told, but that was 430 years. We have trouble remembering back 100 years, 150 years. 50 years sometime, and this is 430 years. In the 9th verse it says, he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are more numerous and powerful than we are. How many did they come there with? 70 people. Okay, now listen to that. They became more powerful, more numerous than the Egyptians were. Let us deal shrewdly with them, otherwise they will multiply further, and if war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So the Egyptians assigned taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. This population was growing bigger than they are. Okay, let's put it on a today's basis. What are we going to do here in the United States when more people come across our borders than what was born and raised here? How will that affect our nation? Either way, it's going to change. Whether it's good or bad, it's going to change. It's going to drastically change. And so you should look at it from Pharaoh's standpoint. I'm trying to be nice to Pharaoh here. Look at the way he was thinking about it. These people who are not his people are growing more numerous than his people are. That would make you a little bit nervous. So I can understand his position, although what he did was not exactly right. Okay? And this is the quote. So in case you all haven't gotten my code yet, if there's something in blue, it's a quote. If it's in red, it's from the Bible. If it's in black, it's probably something I just wrote down. But it's not necessarily a quote. It might be something somebody said, but I don't have a quote. Can't tie it to anybody. This is a quote. The exact year of Moses' birth is uncertain. See, we need to establish. You remember the question I asked a couple of slides back? I said, what did the land look like at the time they were in Egypt, and what peoples were living there? Well, in order to understand that, we need to find out what time frame we're looking at in history. So, the exact year of Moses' birth is uncertain, as different sources give different dates. According to Rabbinical Judaism, Moses was born in 1393 BCE. We say BC. BCE is before the Common Era. We say before Christ. So I like BC better, but this quote had it this way, so that's the way I put it down. According to Jerome, and this is the Jerome that wrote if I'm correct, and if it's not, don't correct me, we just leave it alone. He's the one that wrote the Latin version of the Bible, the Latin Vulgate, some people call it. He's the one who translated it from the Greek and the Hebrew, or was it just the Hebrew anyway, he made it, I think it was Hebrew and Greek. So it was a Latin translation of the Bible, and he dated Moses' birth at 1592 BCE. And according to James Ussher, Bishop Ussher, I have Annals of the World written by Bishop Ussher. He wrote it back in in the 16th century. He wrote this, and he has, I'll have to bring it some night and let you all look at it. He has the exact day and date and month and everything when Adam and Eve were created, and when all that. So he figured it all out pretty close back in the 16th century. I don't know how close he was, but anyway, he said it was 1571 BCE. Moses was born in Egypt at a time when the Israelites were slaves to Pharaoh. This is what the quote said. So you see we have 1393, 1592, and 1571. They're still pretty close together when we're talking about that far back. Okay? With that said, what did the area look like at that time? This is not a Bible map, by the way. This is you can find it in many different kind of maps, and I got this one because this gives you the overall area. I'm going to show you a different one in just a second. But this one shows you the overall area, and this is the land of Canaan. This is the Sea of Galilee. This is the Dead Sea. So right here, this little piece right here is where Israel is today. Okay? And you can see up here Syria, Canaan, Mesopotamia means between the rivers. You all remember that? Between the Euphrates, Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This is basically what the area look. Asia Minor over here is Turkey today. That's where Turkey is to kind of get you in Egypt. You can see it. Mount Sinai, the Red Sea, kind of gives you an idea. When you read about Nineveh, up here is Nineveh. And some we don't recognize, Babylon. But this gives you an idea of what the land looked like where they were in Egypt. For that 400 and some years, there was changes in the land and there were changes of people, but we're going to have to go, we're not going to go year by year for 430 years. That would take us a while. But this is roughly what the area looked like. Now I've got two maps here side by side, and the reason I do is because this kind of breaks down what the land looked like as you get in closer. The land of Canaan, here's Jericho. You remember Joshua fit the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. This is Jericho. So we know over here is the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee, and the Dead Sea is all over here. It doesn't have it on the map. So we have Canaan. We have the Mitanni kingdom. We have all these peoples here that you see, all these cities. And a city would be a state to itself. Many times they'd have their own king. I think I mentioned that the last time. Here's Moab, and then here's Egypt down here. This map shows the route that one of the supposed routes that when they left Goshen in Egypt, when the Israelite people left, This is the journey that they took in order to get across the Jordan River here to Jericho. And Jericho was the first city that they went over and conquered. And you remember when all that happened, and they marched. What did they do? How did they get the wall to fall down? They got the band out front. That's the way we'd put it. And the musicians were out front, the singers were out front, and they marched around the city one at a time. And the next day, marched around the city, and on the seventh day, they marched 7 times around the city, and the walls came down. Now, if I missed a number or two, we can get by with it. But anyway, you can see, so the area that we're talking about here, where it says Canaan, this is right in here. Okay? That's what this map is just this small area here. And so when you look over here, you'll see Philistia. That's about where the Gaza Strip is today. Through the Bible, through the Old Testament, did the Jews have any problems with the Philistines? They're always fighting the Philistines. I mean, Goliath was a Philistine. David knocked him down with a rock and then cut his head off. He's a pretty spunky fellow. But so this land is where that also is where the Gaza Strip is today. Are they still having trouble with that little group of people? It goes on and on and on. When we look at the history, our history, how old is our nation? 240 years old, 250 years, 240 some years old is what our nation is, okay? How old are these areas? This is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, and they've been having trouble with the Philistines for thousands of years. And still people in this area where Philistia was, they're still having problems with them today. It's part of the reason I wanted to do this study, so we could get an idea of who this land belonged to, at what time in history, and how did it fit. And you can see what happened with the children of Israel. They left, they came across here, they got to the promised land, and they sent 12 spies, and they came back, and 10 of them said, we don't need to go over there. These people eat us up. They're giants in the land. We look like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we do in theirs. And Joshua and Caleb they said, wait a minute, we can take them because God is who's fighting our battle, is basically what they said. And they cried and screamed and everything, and they decided not to go. And then when they decided not to go, then they decided they would go, and God said, nope, too late. And they went and got whipped and came back, and they wound up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. What was the purpose in the 40 years in the wilderness? Just off the top, this has nothing to do with our lesson. To kill off all the people who rebelled. People say God spent 40 years teaching them something. Well, he did. He told them, you're going to die. The rest of the people learned something because they said, when our fathers and grandfathers got here, they messed up. They wandered around out here in the wilderness for 40 years. Anyway, when they finally did come back up, they came back up this way and crossed across into the promised land. Okay. So we got it so far. We've gotten from Abraham, we've gotten all the way into the land of Canaan. He came from Ur of the Chaldees to Haran to Canaan, which is the promised land. Then his descendants wound up going to Egypt, and they lived there for over 400 years. And then they came back, and when they came back, they came across here. What were they told to do when they came back? Exodus 23:23 says, for my angel will go before you and bring you to the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. You must not bow down to their gods or worship them. Do not imitate their practices. Instead, demolish them and smash their sacred pillars to pieces. God was serious. Why was this so important? The first part of it is why it's so important. You must not bow down to their gods. Because if they bowed down to their God, how many gods is there? If you're bowing down to another God, what are you worshiping? Things are going to be bad for you. Things are not going to be good. You need to worship the God that can do some good for you. So he tells them this. He says, but what did they have to do? They had to go in and conquer the land. That's what they're commanded to do. We'll get to that in just a minute. I put this map, this is the same one that was on before, where it shows what them coming through here. I like this one. This was a little more primitive, but this shows the peoples that were in that area about this time. And this is fluid for that 430 years and different peoples. But look at this, Philistines are still down here. They were hanging out for a long time. And this is where Gaza is today. So anyway, the Philistines and the Jebusites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Moabites, more Amorites up here, Canaanites here and here, Perizzites, Hivites, Hittites up here, more Hivites up here, and the Gergesenes up here. So this was in this little area between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, this little area that's just part of what Israel is now, had this many different peoples in it. So who did the land belong to? Depending on where you were. This spot belonged to the Philistines. This belonged to the Jebusites. This, now in 10 years it might not be that way, but that's the way it is now. So you can see how this is broken up. In some circles this would be blasphemy, but I don't think it will be here. What is one nation you do not see in there at that time? It's called Palestine. There's no nation of Palestine in there. Do you see a nation of Palestine? Did you see it over here? No. Okay, and the reason I'm saying that, I'm not being ugly, we're going by, I want to follow the maps, follow the history, so we can see how things proceeded and who was where. So while they were in Egypt, this is kind of the way it was broken up. And if you're looking at scripture that I just read, it said that it talked about the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, Jebusites, and you can see some of those in this map here. And they're supposed to come across the river here, or actually about here, and when they get over there, they're supposed to conquer all the lands and establish their tribes. Joshua 1:1. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard this news, he heard the news that the Israelites were coming from Egypt and they were coming into this land. Heard the news, he sent a message to Joab, king of Madon, the kings of Shimron and Asaph, and the kings of the north and the hill country, the Arabah, south of Chinnereth, the Judean foothills and the slopes of Dor to the west, the Canaanites in the east and west, the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites at the foot of Hermon. In the land of Mizpah, they went out with all their armies. A multitude as numerous as the sand of the seashore, along with a vast number of horses and chariots. All these kings joined forces. They came together and camped at the waters of Merom to attack Israel. So when they heard Israel was coming, and they're coming into the promised land, and they had conquered Jericho, these people said, we've got to do something about them. We can't let them come into our country. So they all gathered together to fight. You would have been better off if they'd have been, they say, we want to make peace with you fellas, because you can whip us. And they did. So you can see they got them all these people that they're talking about came in there. Joshua 11:18. Joshua waged war with all these kings for a long time. How long? A long time. No city made peace with the Israelites except the Hivites who inhabited Gibeon. All of them were taken in battle. For it was the Lord's intention to harden their hearts so that they would engage Israel in battle. He completely destroyed without mercy and be annihilated, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now, I'm going to give you an opinion here, and you can take this, or you can believe this, or you can believe a lie. So you can, if whichever way you want to do. The reason, as far as I'm concerned, that God told them to wipe out every person. He said, kill every man, woman, child, goat, sheep, dog, cat, rat, whatever. You clean house. Why would he do that? Well, if you had a little seed of unbelief there, or worshiping another god, we know through Israel's history they had trouble with that anyway. And we'll see why in just before we finish tonight, I hope. But he said, think about this. If they were a very immoral people, How many diseases and things did they have that would have wiped out the Israelites? People talk about that call us colonizers, say that we came over here, the Europeans came over here and we brought blankets with smallpox in it and gave it to the Indians so that they'd catch smallpox and kill them all. Well, nobody back in the 15th to 16th century knew how germs were spread. They didn't know to do that. But there were diseases that the native peoples here had no defense for. There were also diseases that they brought back from here to Europe that they had no defense for. It worked both ways. It's just that these people in Europe were more civilized than the ones over here. So, if they had moved into the land without eliminating all these threats, what's the purpose in the Abrahamic covenant? Is to get the Messiah into the world to redeem mankind. If you can't keep the Abrahamic covenant alive, you can't keep the people of Israel alive, how are you going to get the Messiah into the world? You have to start over somebody else. The children of Israel under Joshua seemingly were following God's instructions on recapturing the land that had been promised to them through the covenant with Abraham. Seemed like it. Judges 2:1, the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I brought you out of Egypt. This is Judges. Did I say Joshua or Judges? It's Judges anyway. Brought you out of Egypt and led you into the land I had promised to your fathers. I led you here. And I promised it to your fathers. I also said, I will never break my covenant with you. You are not to make a covenant with the people who are living in this land, and you are to tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. You have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Therefore, I now say, I will not drive out these people before you. Up until this point, they didn't have to worry about losing a battle, because who was fighting their battle? God was. As long as God's fighting your battle, you're in good shape. They will be thorns in your sides. Have they been? Be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a trap for you. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these words to all the Israelites, the people wept loudly. King James says sorely, so I almost said sorely. So they named the place Bochum, which means weeping, by the way, and offered sacrifices there to the Lord. Okay, so I'm getting here to get us to another map. Don't you all like maps? I like maps. I like pictures because I can see something I can't see in here. When they came into the promised land, look at this map first. If you remember this map from the last time, this is roughly the land that was promised to Abraham. From the river Euphrates all the way here on this side of the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, all the way down to the brook of Egypt, which is here. So all of this land was promised to Abraham. Now look over here. This is the land that the 12 tribes of Israel captured before they disobeyed God and He quit working with them. And this is the land. Is there a difference? This goes all the way down to here. Look where this stops. Look over here where the Philistines, what is that now? Gaza. The Philistines are still there. They didn't conquer the Philistines. They didn't conquer all the Arameans. The Hittites. They didn't conquer all. There's a lot they didn't conquer, and they became a thorn in their side and created problems ever since. This was problem. And people, the question is asked sometimes, well, if God promised Abraham all of this land, why was it never realized? It's because of man, not because of God. God had planned, if they'd have conquered the land that He told them to conquer and the peoples He told them to conquer, they would have conquered all this land. But they didn't. And you can see the tribes of Israel in here. You got Reuben. You got Simeon. You don't have Levi. Why you don't have Levi? The first four sons is Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And you see Simeon, you see Reuben, you see, I missed him. Judah, that's because it's all around. Judah, the biggest area. But you don't have Levi. Because they became the priests and the ones that cared for They were chosen by God as a separate people, and if you read through, you can see where he established certain cities, certain countries for them, and so that way they were dispersed throughout here. So God's chosen were dispersed throughout the kingdom. So everybody had Levites in their area, and they were given cities, and they were given fields outside for their livestock and so on. So you don't see that, but you see all the rest of them. You don't see Joseph. Did you see Joseph on there? Why don't you see Joseph? Joseph is on there. 49th chapter of the book of Genesis. Jacob adopted Joseph's two sons, who were Ephraim and Manasseh. Who did he want to give the double portion to? Who did Jacob want to give the double portion to? Who was his favorite son? Joseph. Well, the double portion he gave to Joseph, this is Randy's opinion again. He gave him a double portion because he adopted Ephraim and Manasseh as his own children, so he gave them actually. So Joseph wound up getting more anyway. So you see Zebulun, Issachar, Naphtali, Asher, all of them were the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, who were the handmaids of Leah and Rachel. But this is what they conquered, and you notice that they didn't conquer. I'm spitting on things up here. They didn't conquer all the lands that they were supposed to conquer, and it caused them grief for the whole time. But, back up real quick. Who was there when they were not there? It's a whole bunch of different people. They came here, and they conquered all this, and this became their land. Joshua 23:6. Be very strong and continue obeying all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. We're backing up to Joshua, by the way. So that you do not turn from it to the right or left, and so that you do not associate with these nations remaining among them. You can't do it, can't stay with them. Do not call on the names of their gods or make an oath to them. Do not worship them or bow down to them. Instead, remain faithful to the Lord your God, as you have done this day. Of course, they said they would. Judges 2:20 says, the Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he declared, because this nation has violated my covenant that I made with their fathers and disobeyed me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. So Joshua died. There was still land that was not conquered, but God quit conquering land for them because they broke their covenant with him. I did this to test Israel and to see whether they would keep the Lord's way by walking in it as their fathers had. Why has the children of Israel never fully possessed the land promised to God's covenant with Abraham? Because they didn't do what God told them to do. If they'd have kept following God and doing what God told them to do, then they would have had all the land that was promised to Abraham, but they never have. I'm not criticizing these people, please understand me. There are people today that supposedly specialize in prophecy, end-time prophecy, that says eventually all the land that was promised to Abraham will belong to Israel. I don't think it will. It's not important whether it is or not. The purpose in Israel being there has been largely fulfilled, but it's a central piece into what will happen throughout into the end of the world as far as I'm concerned. But I don't think they ever will possess all the land that God promised to Abraham. I just don't see it happening. And that land is this, all the way from Euphrates, all the way down to the brook of Egypt, all the way over past the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. Damascus, where's Damascus today? It's in Syria. You said they're bombing Syria today? That's where it is. Damascus is in Syria. So all this land from here up doesn't belong to Israel today. This doesn't belong to Israel today. Down into here, there's a little point that goes down here and back up here, and then what they call the occupied territories over in here. And you can see all that over here. Now compare that to this. Here is Israel today. This is the West Bank, and this is the Gaza Strip. That's the Golan Heights, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq. But look how small this is in comparison to here. This is the Sea of Galilee. There's the Euphrates River. So they don't have near the territory that was promised to Abraham. How much more or how much it'll change in the next few years, I have no idea. Don't claim to be a prophet. I read Scripture and go by what it says. But the point is, the land that he promised to Abraham was never fulfilled, not because God didn't fulfill his covenant. It's because man didn't fulfill his. When something happens in my life that's bad, it's not God's fault. And most people, you have to admit, most negative things that's happened in your life is one way or another your own fault. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. I'm not being ugly. If you look at this, this shows the breakdown. The reason I did this one, this is where the burial site of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all them down next to Hebron, just outside of the Dead Sea. And over here, this is where Jerusalem is today. You notice how what they call the West Bank, the occupied territory, comes all the way over, and half of it, you can go. There's nobody can pray on the Temple Mount except Muslims. If you go up on a Temple Mount and open a prayer book, they will drag you off. Because Jerusalem is split between the Arab and the Jewish segments. The part where you see the Jews worshiping at the Western Wall, that's the outside supporting wall for the Temple Mount. But they can't. You can sometimes go up on the Temple Mount, but you can't pray there. Now this is going to sound prejudiced to some degree, but you can do it. Just look it up and see if I'm telling you the truth. If a Muslim wants to go to Tel Aviv and pray, he can. If a Jew wants to go on the Temple Mount and pray, he can't. Can't. Nope. So do you see a difference in the Jewish people and the Muslims, between Judaism and Muslims? They're very restrictive. But anyway, that gives you an idea of where all of like I said, this is where they think they were buried, here at Hebron, and that's what that section looks like today. And this little strip of land is what's causing all the grief right now. But so far, it hasn't brought many other people in. Did you know our ships have been they've been shooting rockets at our ships out in the Mediterranean? Of course, we've been shooting them down, but any questions?